Probably got a little technical stuff.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is Dave Hillemeier. He's the head of the Yurok Tribe Fisheries Department, and I had the pleasure of working with him for 16 years when I was doing river restoration on the Trinity River. And Dave and the Yurok Tribe are tireless advocates for healthy rivers, clean water, and robust salmon populations. So,
all right.
Thanks for coming to talk to us.
Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, I'm the fisheries director for the tribe, and I've worked for the tribe for about 25 years. And it looks like I have 20 minutes, is that about right? Okay.
That's the advance.
Okay.
To the right.
Okay, so I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of the basin, the process that's led to where we are now in regards to dam removal, some of the benefits from dam removal, some of the potential short-term negative ramifications, things like that. So the Klamath Basin's 12,000 square mile basin, straddles Oregon and California. It's somewhat unique in that most watersheds are very steep in the upper portions of the watershed, not the Klamath Basin. It's very flat in the upper portion of the watershed. In fact, it's so flat that there's a lot of irrigation, a lot of agriculture that takes place in the upper basin. There's the Klamath Irrigation Project in this area right here. It's about 240,000 acres. And then above Upper Klamath Lake in the Wood River, the Sprague River, the Williamson River, you've got about 200,000 acres of irrigated agriculture. It's high desert. They average about 13.5 inches of rain a year. Volcanic geology, there's a lot of springs in the upper basin because of that geology. There are currently 6 dams along the Klamath River, and we're hoping to see 4 of them come out in 2022, the 4 largest by far. But there is a dam called Link River Dam right at the outlet of Upper Klamath Lake. There was a natural reef there historically, and when that dam went in, it actually went in to lower the level of the lake, not to make the lake deeper, and also to be able to control the flows out of the lake. And then there's also Keno Dam, just I think it's about 15 miles downstream of Link River Dam. That's to elevate the river so agriculture can divert water out of the reservoir upstream of Keno Dam. And then there's, of course, a dam, a large dam over on the Trinity River that I'm not going to talk about anymore today. So what led to where we are today in regards to hopefully seeing the dams come out in 2022? Back in the early 2000s, there was a lot going on, a lot of pretty contentious issues in the Klamath Basin, especially in regards to water flows. There was a curtailment or almost a complete shutoff of the Klamath Irrigation Project in 2001 due to a biological opinion, which is per the Endangered Species Act, is developed to protect endangered species, and coho salmon are listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. That got a lot of media attention. You may have seen some of that, but it's been quite a while though. But there was a lot of media attention nationwide about that curtailment for several months. And then the following year, the Secretary of Interior, Gail Norton, came out to open up the head gates to give water back to ag, but it was a very dry year, and there was not nearly enough water in the river. We made our concerns known about that and said that they were going to kill fish if they implemented the plan they proposed. And sure enough, later that summer, we had tens of thousands of fish die on the lower Klamath River while they're migrating up to spawn, largely because of low flows. And there was a pretty good run of fish too, so there's some really high densities of fish that were trapped in the lower river during warm water temperatures, and we had disease problems. The reason I bring this up because well, let me back up a little bit. Our executive director at the time, who has since passed away, Yurok Troy Fletcher, he was very forward-thinking, and he said, you know, the only people that are really winning right now are the lawyers, because we were involved in court case after court case to try to deal with these water issues. And he said, we need to just get together with the irrigators, see if we can come up with some long-term solutions. So the tribes, the farmers, the federal agencies, the states all got together, NGOs got together to negotiate a long-term water solution. At the same time, the FERC process had started for the dams, FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And that started in 2001 because the license was expected to expire in 2006. After thousands of pages of documents have been filed with FERC in regards to this application for the license, there was an administrative law judge hearing that dealt with disputed facts that were in these filings. And after that ALJ hearing, pretty much all of the issues were resolved that showed that those dams needed to provide fish passage and or come down. And then the agencies with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and National Marine Fisheries Service, they have regulatory authority over issuing licenses. And they said that there would need to be fish passage at these dams that doesn't currently exist, both upstream and downstream. And there would also be a curtailment in the amount of water that could generate power because more water needed to stay in the river to support the red-banded trout population and the sucker population that was within the hydroelectric reach. And so PacifiCorp did the math, and they made the business decision that rather than spend several $100 million to try to address passage at these 4 dams, both upstream and downstream, that it would be best for them to join the negotiations with the folks and to seek removing the dams from the Klamath River. So that happened, that these negotiations really started in earnest about 2005, 2006. We came up with a couple of agreements that were signed in 2010 called the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement that dealt more with water issues and funding to address some of the water quality problems in the upper basin. But there was also a Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement. Those agreements required federal legislation that never happened. So they sunsetted on December 31st of 2015. But shortly thereafter, like immediately, the states of Oregon, California, and PacifiCorp got together and said, okay, that died. We didn't get what we hoped out of that. Let's still work on an amended Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement, which they did. And then in April of 2016, within 4 months basically, there was signing of the Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement amendment. And the Secretary of Interior, the governors of Oregon, California, and several other entities signed this amended Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement. So, a little bit about the dams. There's no fish passage, as I already said. They're not used to divert water to ag. They're not used to store water. They're not used to provide flood control. They don't produce, relatively speaking, they don't produce a whole lot of power. It's about 2% of PacifiCorp's energy portfolio. They do produce up to a maximum of about 165 megawatts, but typically they actually produce about half of that because of available water. And PacifiCorp they've gone a lot into wind energy. And I saw a quote from their spokesperson back in 2012 that said they had just developed about 1,600 megawatts of wind energy. I don't know what it's been since then. I just point that out, that even highlights even more that this hydropower on the Klamath dams, these dams that some of them are over 100 years old, is not a huge part of the power that they produce. So some of the upstream benefits that we expect to see from dam removal, here's Iron Gate Dam right here, there's over 400 miles of historic anadromous fish habitat. Anadromous being fish that go out to the ocean and come back to spawn, spend most of their life out in the ocean. There's over 400 miles of historic habitat up there, especially a lot of cold water habitat up there from the springs, from the volcanic geology that used to be really good spring Chinook habitat. That's really important because spring Chinook in the Klamath Basin are hanging on by a thin thread. There's really only 2 very wild remnant populations in the South Fork Trinity River as well as the Salmon River, and both of them are not doing well at all. Currently petitioned to be listed under the Endangered Species Act, both by the federal government as well as the state government. So the access to that thermal refugia is huge. I'm going to go through this real quick. The intent of this slide in the brief version is just to show these blue circles up there, which highlight some of the thermal refugia. You've got a couple of hundred cubic feet per second spring coming out where J.C. Boyle Dam is currently located just downstream of there. And then in the Williamson and the Sprague, there's a cold spring creek where you can see a couple of, I don't know how much water, but it's a large volume of water just coming out of the ground right there. It's a really beautiful spot, but super cold water, and then the Wood River has a lot of spring influence. Crater Lake is actually in the headwaters of the Wood River. But it's not pristine. It's not like the Elwha River where they had Olympic National Park upstream of the dams. We have a lot of development, especially in regards to agriculture that I'd already mentioned that takes place in the upper basin. So there are water quality problems, and so I'm just letting you know that there's other issues that need to be resolved in the basin. I think that the dam removal is by far the largest landscape scale restoration project that we could do, but there's still a lot of work to do. They have a lot of, it's very hyper-eutrophic in the upper Klamath Basin, so there's a lot of algae blooms in many years, and occasionally those algae blooms will result in dissolved oxygen crashes because the algae settles on the bottom, decomposes, and uses up a lot of oxygen. So the run timing, and that happens with the upper Klamath Lake, as well as above that Keno Dam that I pointed to earlier that is used for agriculture. So the run timing of the fish is going to be very important, and I think Mother Nature will sort that out over time. And it'll probably end up being something similar to what happened pre-dams. But they're going to need to be able to get through these areas of poor water quality at the right time of the year. And it appears that spring Chinook will not have a problem. And there is a very productive red band trout population where you get salmon-sized red band trout in the upper Klamath Basin right now. So downstream benefits, one is water quality. Every year there are toxic algae blooms that occur in the reservoirs of the hydroelectric dams. This is a picture of Kako from the air. This is for the Klamath River, relatively clean water coming in. And you can see the toxic algae bloom taking place right there. There will also be a more natural thermal regime, given you have these relatively large reservoirs. They keep the river warmer later into the fall, early wintertime period, which can delay migration of adults going down upstream. And they also keep the river cooler in the spring, early summer months, which can delay growth and has the fish going to the ocean later. That's not what the fish evolved with, so it's not good for supporting healthy populations of fish. It could contribute to things like the fish kill that we had because the migration is delayed. So we think that it'll spread out the run timing of both the juveniles and the adults. It'll also restore the sediment budget. Right now the reservoirs collect all the sediments that come down. There's not a lot of sediments from the upper basin because of the volcanic nature, but there are still sediments and there are tributaries within the hydroelectric reach that input sediment to the basin as well. There was, back when the agreements got signed, the KBRA and the KHSA got signed, there was a scientific team from the Department of Interior that they did some really good research. One of their findings was that if both of those agreements were implemented, it would increase fall Chinook population by about 83%. It'd be about 83% more productive. But that's a little bit misleading relative to this talk because the KBRA went away. Now we just have the hydroelectric agreement, and we don't have an estimate on it. But the result in increased production, but providing access to over 400 miles of habitat is going to be huge for the population. This is to talk a little bit about the disease, just very quickly. We have a really big juvenile disease problem in the Klamath River. There's been in 2014, 2015, 85 and 95% of the, or 81 and 91% of the fish, the juveniles headed downstream that we sampled were infected by this disease. What the disease does, the adults when they're coming upstream, they get infected by this little tiny parasite, and then when the adult fish spawn, their carcass rots, it releases what are called mixospores that are then ingested by these little tiny polychaete worms, a couple of millimeters in length. Here's a picture of a boulder that has a gazillion of these little polychaete worms on them. And when the mixospores are in there, they multiply. One mixospore can turn into several hundred what they call actinospores, which are these little critters that then get released in the springtime when the juvenile fish are in the river. They infect the juvenile fish, and when they get in the fish's gut, it causes an infection that can lead to death. And so we're really looking to try to minimize that, and we think that taking these dams out are going to go a long ways in that direction. I'm going to go back. Largely because right now we have a very armored substrate in the upper Klamath River because we don't have any sediment input because the reservoirs are capturing all this sediment. And so we have just big boulders mostly. If we get some smaller stuff in there, reintroduce this sediment, not only will it be sandblasting these little polychaete worms, but we'll also have smaller rocks that'll move when we get higher flows. And it's just going to make life more miserable for these polychaete worms. It should help to address that disease problem. There will be some high sediment loads from the dams coming out. Most of it is projected to be suspended sediments. There's currently about 13 million cubic yards of sediment behind those reservoirs. About 5 to 8.5 is expected to be eroded and go downstream. but 85% of that is suspended sediments. A lot of that is dead algae that is settled on the bottom of the reservoirs. And the thinking is that that stuff is going to go out during probably the first year, especially if we have a substantial flow event at all. And so the hope right now is the drawdown of the reservoirs will begin January 2022. And that will happen during the first 3 months. The reservoir should be completely drawn down by the end of March, which is when you start to see a lot of the juvenile fish using the main stem, coming in from the tributaries, using the main stem. And then the dams are going to come out. All 4 dams are planned to come out in one summer over about a 3 to 4 month period. So it's going to be a huge project. And there is expected to be some mortality. This is for like fall chinook. It's expected to be about 8% because most of these fish are spawning in the tributaries, so they're not going to be substantially affected. But there will be effects, and they'll be, depending on what species, they're projecting that first year there will be some mortality because of the dam removal and the high sediment loads. There will be, in regards to reintroduction, most of it is expected to happen passively, where the fish will just be allowed to stray into the new habitat on their own volition. The only exception to that will be with spring chinook, because the closest spring chinook population is so far away, being the Salmon River. It's over 100 miles away, that the state of Oregon is looking at doing some sort of a conservation hatchery in the upper Klamath Lake area to release spring chinook up there. And there's still a lot of work going on determining what is going to be the best source of brood stock to do that. So as I said, we're anticipating in 2022. It's not a done deal yet. FERC still, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, still has to grant the permit to take the dams out. The State Water Board is currently working on a CEQA document for the 401 permit, which is a water quality permit to be able to take the dams out. That they've put out 2 public drafts so far, and it seems that they're probably getting pretty close to being there to issue that permit. But don't want to speak for them by any means. There's an application that was submitted in 2016 to transfer ownership of the dams to the Klamath River Renewal Corporation, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization whose sole purpose is to oversee the dam removal process. There has been, the prime contractor has been chosen after a bidding process, and that is Kiewit. They're currently working on, FERC has asked, the primary questions that they've received from FERC is, what if you don't have enough money? What if it costs $450 million and $5, where you can get that extra $5? And also about the liability, who's going to take care of the liability. So they've been working a lot on that, and they're supposed to have a guaranteed maximum price estimate back to FERC by the end of this month. And then the hope is that FERC is going to dive into the NEPA process, and that we're going to reach our goal of having the dams come down in 2022. Initially it was 2020, then it got delayed to 2021, now it's 2022. Hopefully it's not going to get delayed again. Iron Gate Hatchery, there's currently a hatchery up in the upper, right at the base of Iron Gate Dam, that releases about 5 million salmon, Chinook salmon in the springtime and about 1 million in the fall time. That's going to go away because Iron Gate gets its water source from Iron Gate Reservoir. There are options where they can pump water to keep Iron Gate Hatchery going, but it looks like instead they're going to reinvigorate what used to be a small-scale hatchery about 12 miles upstream in Fall Creek, and they're going to reduce the production. And this is going to happen for 8 years post-dam removal. They're planning to use Fall Creek, and they're going to release about 2/3 of the current fall chinook production. They don't release a lot of coho up there, but it's more of a conservation facility because coho are hanging on by a thin thread as well. And so there's going to be a conservation hatchery to try to keep coho going while they are introduced into this new habitat. And there is some really good coho habitat in one of the streams that feeds into the hydroelectric beach. And this is an old slide, and it just shows that we've fallen back 2 years. It was 2020 for dam removal, is now moved over to 2022. And that's my last slide.
I've read that Trump is threatening to release a lot more water for the farmers upstream. what do you think are the chances that'll pass the courts? And then if it does, how will that affect the dam removal program and then the streams in general?
Right. Well, there's recently been news about Trump. He just came out to California a couple of days ago. That was more Central Valley centric. He's promising that they're going to get like 600,000 acre more feet in the Central Valley.
Okay.
But I guarantee you that's going to be contested in the courts, and that could go on for quite a while. We're currently in litigation over a biological opinion on water flows in the Klamath River, and it's yet to see BC. We're actually have a court hearing, our first court hearing next Friday down in San Francisco to deal with that. But it's unfortunate that KBRA did not go forward, because we are basically almost in continual litigation because we are not getting the river flows that we feel that we need. And the Klamath populations have done extremely poorly over the last 4 or 5 years. Yeah.
Global warming, you're in a rain shadow up there and it's already warm. Is it expected to get warmer? And if you take out the dams, will it be like just in time for the fish?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think so. Because of the thermal refugia, that's really one of the reasons that we want access to that thermal refugia, is that could be a big thing we could do to help fish survive through the global warming that we're facing. Yeah.
So how are the dams actually removed?
It's going to be, some of them are virgin, so it's just going to be excavators digging out dirt and rocks that make up them. Some of them are concrete, so there's going to be chipping away at the concrete and hauling it away. Probably not going to be, it could be some dynamite, but it's not going to be a huge blow it up and then.
So what's the impact on the water quality of the earth being moved through it, the concrete being chipped away? What happens to the water then and the fish?
Yeah, most of that, the reservoirs are already dropping down, so during the removal, there probably won't be a lot of turbidity issues, but that first year and during the drawdown, there's going to be major turbidity issues. It's going to be very severe, but it is expected that the turbidity and the sediment load, or the sediment load that's going to be coming from the dams, is going to be similar to what we see from the Trinity River on an annual basis. Yeah.
What's the estimated timeline for those fish to repopulate that area a lot higher upstream?
That's a great question that I don't have a good answer for. Yeah, I think a lot of it is going to be
not going up there for a long time.
Yeah, a lot of it's going to be wait and see, and part of the reintroduction plan is let's wait 3 generations, which will be about 9 to 12 years, and then if needed, consider some reintroduction efforts. But in other basins, fish have recolonized areas quite quickly. So, yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Great. Dave, we thank you for the program. Back in the day, we used to do what everybody else did. We gave them a coffee cup, which probably was used for target practice a lot more for drinking coffee, because anybody who gives money probably gets a lot of coffee cups. So in lieu of that, a number of years ago, we changed over, and now we make a donation in your name to the Wheelchair Foundation. The Wheelchair Foundation is a 501c3 that Rotary's partnered with a number of years. And what they do is they supply wheelchairs in developing countries for people who have mobility issues. And these aren't just your garden variety down Arcata Plaza wheelchair. These guys are like trucks. They're built heavy. They've got 10-ply tires, you know, with big knobby tires. They're the kind of thing that's not going to fail on somebody who's going to take that wheelchair. And it's not uncommon at all when people do these deliveries. People get brought in like sitting in a chair, and they carry the chair of the person, or they get carried in, or whatever. And you know, mobility is like a lot of things. I mean, having access and being able to move around has a huge change in somebody's life. So, you know, through this program, you're helping us, and we're helping you. And at some point, you know, a wheelchair will be given to somebody, and those things cost about $150. So throughout the year, you know, 2 or 3 wheelchairs are added to that program every year that we make other donations also. So thank you very much.
Fantastic doing that.